Above us are the ruins of the Hyrcanian fortress, which is about 200 meters above the Hyrcanian valley. The fortress was built either by Alexander Yanai of the Hasmonean dynasty, who lived between 127 and 76 BC, or by his father, John Hyrcanus I, whom the fortress is named after, lived during 164 and 104 BC. Just to associate them with more familiar characters, look at the family tree of the Hasmoneans. John Hyrcanus was the son of Simon Tassi and the grandson of Matesias, who founded the Hasmonean dynasty. Now, you look at the fortress in such a location, and one of the questions that comes to my mind is, what was the main purpose of building a fortress in this location in the middle of the desert? On the face of it, the desert forts seem to be perceived by many as a place of refuge for the ruler. But when examining the essence of the forts throughout the Persian Empire, for example, one can see the hierarchy of forts. And the most important forts were actually used to store treasury, including documents related to the king's land administration, such as the leasing of the land and the registration, record of tax collection, and so on. The fortresses of the Judean deserts from the Second Temple period played a similar role, but they served preliminary as treasuries and administrative centers. Now, Yosef ben Matityahu, known by his Roman name, Joseph Flavius, describes some events that confirm that the desert forts were used as treasuries. He says, for example, that in two forts, Horkanya and Sartaba, the queen Salome Alexander, also known as Alexandra of Jerusalem, and in Hebrew known as Shlom Tzion from the Hasmonean dynasty, holds her most valuable assets here. The great splendor that characterized the Judean Desert forts indicate that they were not intended to be used as soldiers' quarters. So the location of the fortress in the Judean Desert, close to the kingdom capital, Jerusalem, ensured the ruler that the treasures of the kingdom would be protected and available when needed. Since the treasure were distributed throughout several fortresses, it resolved the concern that the kingdom pressure assets would all fall into enemy hands if such a single fortress was captured. How and where water is stored here? In the desert. Now, most of the desert area is covered with soft chalk rocks, which are relatively impermeable to seepage and therefore contribute to the aridity of the area. The rock opacity causes the rainwater that cannot seep in to be collected in the channels, and sometimes causes flooding when it's heavy raining on the mountains. The local took advantage of this phenomena in ancient times and diverted the floodwater to cisterns. As with all desert fortresses, there was an impressive water system that led floodwaters from nearby streams onto the water canal and into large cisterns. There is a system of large cisterns inside the fort above us, and also quite few of them on the southern side. Now, the two aqueducts end in 21 cisterns and pools with a total capacity of 20,000 cubic meters. Let's talk a little bit about the Hasmoneans. So, Simon Tassi was the second son of Matesias the priest and the brother of Judah Maccabee. He was the last son of Matesias to survive. According to the book of the Jewish historian Josephus Flavius, the People Assembly appointed Simon as the high priest and president and determined that this position would be inherited. Simon and his brother did much to establish the independent Jewish state while fighting the Seleucid kingdom and the non-Jewish inhabitants of Judea. The years between 167 BC, the year of the outbreak of the Hasmonean Revolt, and John Hyrcanus' inheritance of his father's throne in 134 BC, were years of constant military struggle here. During the period his father ruled, John Hyrcanus was sent with his brother Judah to fight the army of the Seleucid kingdom. After a series of victories for both of them over the Seleucid army, Antiochus VII managed to seduce Simon and his two sons to come to a feast in Jericho. And there he murdered them. And this happened in 134 BC. After Simon's death, John Hyrcanus was proclaimed president in place of his father. Now, shortly after Antiochus sent his army to Judea with the aim of conquering it, in view of his superior power, John fortified himself in Jerusalem. Antiochus besieged it for 2 years between 134 and 132 BC, and the siege ended when John offered to reach a settlement. Antiochus left the city in 132 BC and agreed to give the status of a ruler vassal to John. This status of a ruler vassal means that John can rule as long as he meets the requirement of the entity that sponsored him, in this case the Seleucid kingdom. The requirement will usually include paying taxes and participating in wars and more. Antiochus was killed 3 years later in 129 BC. His successors no longer had the strength to go to war of conquest against Judea. And then John Hyrcanus took the opportunity and minted in 127 BC the first coin ever for an independent Jewish state. Historical moment. John Hyrcanus set out for his conquest to expand the borders of the country probably only in 112 BC. He began the conquest of Edom, mainly their two central cities, Maresha and Adora, which is Adoraim, mentioned in the Bible in the book of Chronicles. John Hyrcanus converts the Edomites, that is, he converts the conquered people as opposed to their exclusion. John did that in order to add power to the Hasmonean kingdom. Later, a man of Edom descent, Herod the Great, sat on the throne of the kingdom of Judea. In 107 BC, John Hyrcanus conquered and destroyed the city of Samaria, took over the land of the Samaritans, and destroyed the temple on Mount Gerizim to strengthen the centrality of the temple in Jerusalem. We are in the northern part of the Judean Desert. The Hyrcanian Valley is in front of us. It's actually a long valley, 12 kilometers, and a width of 3 kilometers. In the Byzantine period, a monastery referred to as Koinbion or Cenobion was established on the remains of the fortress by the monk Sabas in the year 492. This monastery, named Castellion, has not been able to survive, unlike the desert monasteries that are active to this date in the Kidron Valley and in the Prat Valley. The monks seem to have lived here continuously until the 14th century. After that, Horkanya was abandoned, and what is left to see are remains of mosaica and some underground structures. John Hyrcanus died in 104 BC after 31 years in power and at the age of 60. He had 5 sons: Judas Artigonus I, Alexander Yanai, Avshalom, and another son that his name is unknown. He was the first ruler from the Hasmonean dynasty to die in a natural death. From this point in time, the story of the Hasmonean dynasty can compete with any telenovela, with quite a few internal family intrigues that we will not expand on. The first mention of the Hyrcania fortress is at the end of Queen Salome Alexandra reign period, and she ruled between 76 and 67 BC. Just to remind ourselves, Salome Alexandra, in Hebrew named Shlom Tzion, was the wife of Alexander Yanai, who was the son of John Hyrcanus. Josephus Flavius wrote that Horkanya, along with the fortress of Machaerus, in Hebrew named Michvar. Machaerus is a mountain in the kingdom of Jordan, approximately 25 kilometers east of us, and the Sartaba fortress, which is about 40 kilometers north of us. So the three of them, Horkanya, Machaerus, and Sartaba, those were the three forts the queen did not give up when she handed over the other forts to the Pharisees. Because according to Joseph Flavius' quote, there she kept the treasures of its virtue. And this well corresponds to what we discussed about the role of the desert forts in the Hasmonean period. Regarding when the fortress was destroyed for the last time, not sure I have a good answer. I know that Hyrcania served as the basis for a later revolt of Princess Alexandra the Maccabee against Herod. Herod conquered Jerusalem in 37 BC and executed the last Hasmonean king, Antigonus Mathathias, who was Alexandra's brother. In response, she gathered her brother's supporters and took control of Hyrcania. She ruled here probably until 31 BC, when Herod finally conquered the place. Herod most likely executed her, as well as many others, including his eldest son, Antipater. As always, we will end with a trivia question. The Hasmonean kingdom aspired to organize the counter-force against the Seleucid kingdom, which was its main enemy. And one of John Hyrcanus' moves was to unite it under him, whether in alliance or military conquest, neighboring nations like the Edomites, the Nabateans, and the Itureans. The question is, what is the main commercial activity that the Nabatean engaged in? The answer will appear in 5 seconds.